First time on the island, sir? Asked the driver. Yes, first time, said John. And hopefully it'll last, he thought to himself. Oh, you're in for a treat then. Beautiful city, Tamarin. I still remember the first time I saw it. You know, properly, like, not on the telly. Beautiful. John wasn't really in the mood for making small talk. He sat back and let the driver ramble on about the city and the amazing sights he had in store. He wished Duncan had been in touch. He hadn't heard from his cousin since he first arrived. John had so many questions about the academy, and Duncan might have been able to answer a few. For starters, why did they want to see him? Forewarned is forearmed. He heard his father's voice in his head. He missed his father. The family had always teased John Sr. about his mottos and sayings, but John had come to realise that they were more than just hackneyed platitudes. There was a pragmatic, down-to-earth wisdom to them. Here we are, sir. Gateway to the city, the driver informed him. The large blue neon sign on the immigration building read, Welcome. John smiled an ironic smile. This was a heavily guarded security checkpoint designed to keep out the unwanted. It was anything but welcoming. Don't worry, sir. We'll be through in a jiffy. The driver was true to his word. The security officer scanned the driver's ID and immediately waved him through. They were already leaving the confines of the security tower before John realised. They hadn't even asked to see his ID. John felt like he already knew the city. He'd seen it on TV so many times. The parades up Edison Avenue, the annual ASA Awards presentation in Academy Plaza. I hope you brought your sunglasses, the driver laughed. John knew what he meant. Tamarin was sometimes called the City of Light, because of the way the sun reflected off the glass towers. As they turned onto Edison Avenue, John got his first real view of the academy. Its proper name was the Tamarin Academic Parliament Assembly Building. Everyone just called it the academy. Despite his reluctance to be here, John couldn't help but be impressed with the city. Seeing it on TV was one thing. Seeing it in the flesh was quite another. Angular glass and steel monoliths rose up all around him. As they passed each one, John couldn't help but feel they were watching him, judging him. Well, said the driver, here we are. John looked out of the window. John's imagination had conjured up 100 different scenarios for how his interview would pan out. But even in the most outlandish versions, he hadn't imagined this. The Progressive Insurance Building, John said, unable to keep the disbelief out of his voice. That's right, sir. Go straight in. They're expecting you. I thought I was... John didn't bother to finish the sentence. He got out of the car and looked at the squat and rather unimpressive building in front of him. Amid his confusion, he also felt a sense of relief. One of the things he had been dreading was the prospect of finding himself on one of the upper floors of a glass-walled skyscraper. Just the thought of it sent another shiver running through him. John wondered if he'd been guilty of letting his imagination run away with him. Perhaps he'd been worrying over nothing. No, he told himself firmly. Don't let your defences drop so easily, John. He touched his cheek again as he remembered Ginny's last words to him. Be careful. Steeling his resolve, he walked purposefully towards the building and entered the foyer. The interior of the building was rather like the exterior, unremarkable. No fountains or holograms, no gravity-defying sculptures. It didn't even have an atrium. In fact, it had none of the lavish trappings that one might have expected to see. After all, this was Tamarin Island. Instead, it was simple, functional, and rather dull, John thought. He walked over to the reception desk and straight into yet another surprise. The receptionist was a woman, A real live woman. "Good afternoon, Mr. Keeghan," she said brightly. "I'm Melanie. Welcome to Progressive." Melanie was certainly as attractive as any holographic receptionist would have been, and just as perfect. From her neatly bobbed blonde hair to the crisp white blouse and dark grey jacket of her uniform, there wasn't a crease to be seen, not a single hair out of place. Good afternoon," said John. Why would they have a real person at reception, he wondered. Virtual workers had replaced humans in these kind of jobs since before he was born. Receptionists, bank tellers, pretty much any job that involved a simple customer interface. Not only were they more cost effective, but they were simply better at the job. They could converse in just about any language. They were always polite, never late for work, never got sick. The good ones even used facial recognition, so they could always greet you by name, although Melanie had somehow managed to duplicate that trick. "Here's your visitor's badge, Mr. Keeghan. Please display it at all times." Her smile never changed as she handed it to him, but a little twinkle in her eyes gave away her amusement. John realized he'd been staring, and felt the heat rise in his cheeks. He took the opportunity to examine his name tag. It gave him something else to look at. The name's wrong," he said. It's Keeghan with an H." "I'll be sure to correct our records," she said reassuringly. "They're expecting you on the second floor. The elevators are just to your right." "Thanks," said John. "You're welcome," Melanie replied. "Have a pleasant day." John could think of several adjectives to describe how his day was going. Pleasant wasn't really one of them. On the second floor he was met by yet another attractive young woman. Like Melanie, she wore the same grey and white uniform. And, just like Melanie, she was immaculate. She ushered him down a corridor that led to a large but rather plain conference room. The man sitting on the far side of the conference table was busy sifting through a large file of papers. "Mr. Henderson," said the woman. "John Keeghan." The man looked up from his work. "John, please, come in. Take a seat." The man gestured to the chair opposite him. John pulled out the chair and sat, at the same time taking a few moments to study the man sitting across from him. He was middle-aged, late 40s, John guessed. A rectangular face with a defined, slightly pointed chin and a sturdy jawline. His dark eyes were small and spaced evenly apart, sitting below trim eyebrows that seemed to curve as a natural extension of his broad, rounded nose. He kept his mouth closed in a thin, straight line, and his hair, dark and slightly greying at the temples, was slicked back to reveal a broad forehead. The dark grey jacket he wore over his somewhat narrow shoulders was neatly pressed, and the corner of a small white handkerchief peeked out of the breast pocket. He sat straight, his face held forward in a steady gaze, and had an air of authority that was almost palpable. All in all, the man was quite unremarkable. Just like a million other mid-level executives, thought John. The man closed the file that he'd been flipping through, and John caught a glimpse of his name on the front jacket. John felt a tinge of irritation. They'd spelled his name wrong again. "So tell me, John," the man said, still holding that steady gaze, "how long have you suffered from vertigo?" That stopped John in his tracks. His fear of heights was something that he never talked about, not since Duncan had teased him about it incessantly when they were children. Duncan, he concluded. It had to be. John stared back at the man, searching for some clue as to where this was all leading. He's not interested in the answer to the question, John told himself. He's interested in your reaction. "I didn't come here for a psych evaluation," said John coldly. "Why am I here?" The man smiled, a tight-lipped smile. "Let me tell you what we do here, John. Maybe that will make things a little clearer. After the Third War, when the Academy was first established, the Council decided that, in addition to their existing security services, they wanted to establish a separate organisation, outside the Academy, whose role would be to independently source and verify sensitive intelligence. In effect, they wanted an insurance policy. The man smiled that tight-lipped smile again. He seemed to find himself quite amusing. "You're telling me," John paused, trying to get his head around it. "You're telling me that Progressive Insurance is actually a covert spy network for the Academy?" John made no effort to keep the derisive tone out of his voice. No, of course not," said Henderson. "Just my department." John re-examined the man sitting opposite him. He didn't look crazy. "And you're telling me this because we'd like you to work for us, John?" John stood up abruptly. He needed to move around, needed to catch his breath. After a few seconds, he stopped. Okay, let's assume for a minute that all of that is true. Why on earth would you want someone like me? Henderson's steady gaze never wavered. "It's quite simple, John. You're a very unique individual. You see, for all intents and purposes, you don't exist."